acknowledge the Asia Foundation, New Zealand Asia Foundation, for their support of our early morning session and the morning tea that followed. So thank you very much for that. And we've got 2 more sessions before lunch, so keep those Slido questions coming, and but don't be afraid to interact in real time as well. So we'd like to see those hands going up, and we're really keen to share with you the microphone. And I'm going to hand over to Fran O'Sullivan, who's going to be chairing this session, and I'm going to go and have a look for Jianping.
Meantime, he's on his way, and I can see him out there. So I will start introducing him pretty much from when he comes in the door. But when later on, if you don't have to only be dependent on Slido, if you feel you want to engage from the floor, put your hand up when it comes to the Q&A, and welcome back. So let me just introduce this session, China, the WTO, and the future of Asia-Pacific trade. It's obviously, we've been hearing over the last day or so, a tumultuous time in world trade, and we've already heard in this forum that we sit in the world's most economically powerful region, but it's subject to disruption and disruptors. Trade liberalisation opened the way for countries such as ourselves to prosper, not just through bilateral FTAs, such as with China, a world first for a developed country, but also through the rules order at the WTO, where New Zealand advocated for China's accession. But the global order has challenged US and China in serious conflict. The golden weather we've heard for trade may have passed, and small nations like ours must bandy up with others to keep markets open, as we also prepare for New Zealand's role hosting APEC in 2021. To give us a unique perspective on China, WTO, and the future of Asia-Pacific trade, let me welcome to the stage Dr. Zhang Jianping. He is the director of the Research Centre for Regional Economic Cooperation under MOFCOM, and I hope you don't mind me stating, known in China and elsewhere as a foremost China trade guru. He's been a regular commentator on CGTN this year as the skirmishes between China and the US have played out. He is a distinguished academic, more than 100 papers and 4 books to his record, and influential in public discourse, not just in China, but elsewhere in the world where the big conversations on global power and trade are taking place. Welcome.
Okay. Yeah, hello. Thank you, Chair. Firstly, I'm very grateful to Auckland University for inviting me to come here. This is my first time in New Zealand, even if in the past 20 years I cooperated with a lot of scholars from New Zealand, especially thanks to Rob. He is my old friend. This time he invited me half of years ago. So this morning I have a very big topic. You know that everyone, China's reform and opening up, that's a big topic. Also, WTO reform, another one. And the third one is our Asia-Pacific regional economic cooperation. So, just like this, yeah. So part 1, very briefly to introduce China's, new reform and opening up measures. In this part, actually, there are so lot of contents, but I just have 30 minutes, so I just very briefly to introduce. Nowadays, I have to remind you that today China is the largest manufacturing center in the world, as well as the biggest trade partners for more than 100 countries in the world. Meanwhile, China has the most comprehensive industrial system, every sector, for first industrial, second, third, tertiary, all of them you can find that in China. Especially for manufacturing sectors, you may find that for developed countries, they already, so a lot of sectors moving out of those countries. But in China, you can find it. in a competitive, market. Also, that global value chain cooperation bring China and the rest of the world, closer and closer. Nowadays, China has to promote a new round of reform and opening up, just because today China has become a so-called, middle-income country. In order to avoid getting into so-called middle-income trap, we have to, have more and more high-value-added, manufacturing sectors, as well as, service sectors. So if you look at two figures, the left one, you may find that manufacturing value added in world today, actually China occupied 30%. So that means China is the biggest player for manufacturing sectors. But if you look at the USA, 20 years ago, US occupied 30%, close to 30%. But right now, USA just half of 15%. So that's relying on global supply chain cooperation. And the right one, you may find that, for merchandise value in main countries. So today, except China and the US, and the fourth one, that is Germany, Japan, those developed countries. But if you look at India, actually India percentage in global manufacturing sector value added quite limited. Still, there is a long time, to go. Of course, many people mentioned Vietnam as a very active player in ASEAN 10 economies, but Vietnam lower than that in India. And here, I just listed China's most comprehensive industrial system. Sorry, I have no time to read it carefully. I just, show you here. And I just like to say that today in this world, not only India, but also Vietnam and other developing countries, no one can replace China's role, manufacturing role in global market. So that's why from Chinese side, we are quite confident to fight with USA. Because that USA just want to moving out of those sectors from China to other countries, and from those figures you may feel that that would be impossible in short term, even if in mid-term. And also, that China is so lucky just because of, in the past 4 decades, globalization accelerating due to, technology development and especially communication technology and transportation technologies. Also, China gradually, grown into the largest supplier of intermediate goods in the world. So that's quite different, role. At the beginning, China mainly played a role of assembler in the world. But nowadays, if you look at, for example, in Mexico, actually, I heard that most of, actually parts, intermediate goods, Mexico can export it, import it from China and assembly in Mexico and re-export to other countries, including the USA, this type of model. So actually China is playing a key hub role in global value chain. In this regard, Apple and Boeing products are belonging to very typical cases. So if you look at this figure and this table, you may find that actually Apple, this type of products, seriously relying on a global supply chain. Actually, that there are so lot of factories, provide their products or service to Apple, but most of those, factories located in China. Of course, that in China we have our very biggest, assembler, that is Foxconn. Actually, the boss, Mr. Guo Taiming, already invited by Mr. Trump to invest more than 10 billion US dollars in the US. But this guy right now has a very headache problem. That is, in the US, he cannot collect enough qualified worker labor force. So that's problems. Not only for China's, factory, but also, if you look at Singapore investors in the U.S., they want to invest in manufacturing sectors, same problem. And of course, for Apple products, here I just like introduce a very funny story. When I gave my lecture to those politicians from U.S. Congress, and I asked them, do you know how much money could be earned by Chinese assembler for one set of iPhone? Do you know this number? I just, provide my advice to those, U.S. politicians. I said that you can guess as smaller as one. And those, respondents tell me that 200 US dollars. I told him, oh, you can ask Apple if they can earn, for one set of iPhone, 200 US dollars. You don't know, global supply chain. And then second one told me 100 US dollars. I said that you don't know international trade. And the third one told me 50 US dollars. I told that guy is too high. And the last one, 30 US dollars. I told him still quite high. So according to our, calculation by global value chain, study team, in 2015, only, less than 6 US dollars. But today, 8 US dollars. So this type of amazing, very low value added. And another thing I like to, I also invite those US friends to guess, that is in the biggest, assembler located in Shenzhen, working for iPhone, how many young Chinese workers, working for iPhone? And you can guess this number as big as one. And those US friends told me that, 5,000. My answer was too small. And the second answer, that is 10,000, too small. And the last one, 20,000. My answer still too small. So the real, the true answer was that 300,000. 300,000. So one politician told me that, oh my God, that's equal to the population in my country, a big city, population. So for foreigners, they cannot imagine for Chinese workers how hard we are working for those, transnational corporations, but our profit quite limited. That's why, Mr. Guo Taiming claims that in the next 10 years, and he is planning to set up more than 10 assembling factories in India. But the problem is that he found that this is also another headache problem, because iPhone supply chain seriously relying on aviation transportation system. But in India, they cannot satisfy this type of conditions. So that's why, I heard that recently, the last production line in the US, for Apple, corporation, they are planning to moving out of the US, go to where? Go to China, inside of India, inside of Vietnam. So I just tell you this story that is, in short term, so-called, moving out of those, manufacturing sectors, a lot from China to other developed countries, that's not follow international rules. That will take long time. No, that doesn't happen, in short time. Of course, for China, we realize that we cannot make those, low value added, sectors stay in China for a long time. So for China, it's very urgent, very significant for us to promote a new round of reform and opening up. including reduction of tariffs, expand foreign market access, modify and release a new foreign investment law, promote continuous expansion of the free trade experimental zone. And regarding China's reduced tariff by ourselves, you know that we already satisfied the requirement of WTO on tariff reduction. Furthermore, in recent years, year by year, we reduced our tariff, especially for those consumption goods. Here, that guy is from agriculture sectors, and he knows very well. Also, if you look at totally, I like to tell you that recently, MOFCOM in China released a data that is, in China, our weighted mean tariff already reduced, just 3.8% average for those, manufactured sectors products. And if you look at Australia, 4%. So that means China already, has a very relatively low, tariff level in China. That means we can import more and more, consumption products as well as other products from other countries. Also, Shanghai import-export this year will be, reorganized and also benefit for China's imports. Of course, China expands market access for foreign investors. And you know that today, we are very proud of, we can provide our pre-national treatment as well as post-national treatment for those, foreign investors. Also, we provided our, negative lease management measure. And if you look at the data, actually in the past 5 years, for national negative list restrictions and free trade zone negative list restrictions, you know that the items, articles, reduced one by one. So the new is released this year, in free trade zones, for example, in Shanghai, only 37 articles belonging to restricted or prohibited. All of those other sectors, you can choose what you want to invest. Of course, for national, still, 40, but that's also very small number and very short list. Here, I just give you some of, sectors cases, including, vehicles, financial areas, communication. And if you look at the vehicles, actually Tesla already invested in Shanghai as independent, foreign-funded enterprises. In the past, Chinese side required joint venture in these sectors. So after five years, these sectors, for foreign investors, you can decide whether you are willing to have joint venture or independent. And for financial areas, recently, Chinese authorities released 11, new opening up, measures, including, that Visa. Visa right now already last year set up their branch in Beijing, independent. And another is, actually credit assessment, company also set up their branches in China independently. And for communication, that in China we have our big three players for services, telecommunication services. But now UK, telecom servicer also allowed to enter China's market as a fourth, biggest player. So that's new progress. So regarding China's modified foreign investment law released, a few months ago, very important, that this law will guarantee in China actually not only national treatment and foreign investment security review system, Meanwhile, all of people, concerned IPR issues, technology transfer issues, as well as, regarding if those foreign-funded enterprises can join China's standard making and public governmental procurement. Actually, all of those already have, new rules and regulations. Especially in China's, free trade zones, actually, all of those new rules and regulations should be implemented as a pioneer. In China, actually, we think that FTZ is the most, trade and investment liberalization and facilitation, areas. That's belonging to, we call that China's opening up platform, new platform. And if you look at the map, actually, recently, another 6 provinces get their new platform. So that means till now, 18 China's provinces have this type of new platform. That means all of those, actually not only foreign investors, but also domestic investors, if they are willing to promote high value added sectors development, actually those FTZ can provide both, trade, investment, liberalization, and facilitation measures. That means the highest, investment efficiency. So right now, if you look at relative publicly released data, registered, companies, the number is very high, doubled, tripled than that in the past. So second part regarding, WTO reform. Of course, WTO reform, this is not a new subject, but recently, especially facing with new uncertainties and, urgency. I think that, of course, WTO need to improve efficiency of monitoring functions, also dispute settlement system right now facing with new challenge. Meanwhile, how to modernization of the, trade rules, improve transparency and notification, consensus decision-making, special and differential treatment for developing countries. That's very, very, critical points. Why does WTO need to be reformed? Because today, global economic balance of power is shifting, year by year. And especially, that my sense is that today for developing country, we are still, enjoy, WTO rules and regulations because we appreciate that, platform provided our very valuable, opportunities to be involved in globalization and development opportunities. However, U.S. as a major, role, seriously not satisfied, for WTO, rules and regulations. And, if you look at international trade pattern has been changed seriously. Also, scale of global trade imbalance increase. Anti-globalization and unilateralism and protectionism already appeared in global markets. The failure of Doha development round also make a lot of people, quite, upsided. Meanwhile, WTO's monitoring mechanism is not functioning properly. The weakness in the WTO dispute settlement system, all of those problems, I think that need to be, need to have new solutions. Of course, from EU side, I appreciate EU's role and supporting for WTO regime. Also, EU side, provided their, on rules making, on rules work and transparency, dispute settlement, they have their, special viewpoints. But the United States, actually, I think that right now provided a new pressure on WTO, especially for how to, recognize developing country. That you just very simply regarded China, Singapore, Qatar, ROK, India, Turkey, all of those G20s should not belong into developing countries. Do you think so? I don't think so, because you know that if you look at maybe Singapore, that's a typical developed economy, and South Korea maybe belonging to new emerging, industrialized country, but for India, China, that's typical, developing country. Not only mention China, India, only, Brazil. You know that Brazil claims that, we are not a developing country. We need to join OECD club. And when I give a lecture to those, military commander from developing countries, one guy is from, Brazil. I just ask those attendants, do you think that Brazil becomes a developed economy? All of those attendants laughing at, Brazil guys. So I like to tell you that for developing countries culture, definitely, you cannot say, just, per capita GDP should be, only one, indicator to make sure. But I think that we need to have a new, index system to, make comments on that in order to make all of people, convinced which one is true, developing countries, which one is already should be graduated from that group. But the critical issue is that all of countries need to have common discussion. And we need to have, consensus on that instead of only the US, provided a new, standard. Of course, from Chinese side, we provided our basic principles on WTO reform, shall preserve the core value of the multilateral trading system, shall safeguard the development interests of developing members, also follow the practice of decision-making by consensus. So China's proposal on WTO reform released by China's MOFCOM, including all of those contents. So generally speaking, I think that we appreciate WTO's most favorite treatment principles and no description principles. Also, I think that all of WTO members should appreciate WTO value instead of giving up. Of course, in my mind, Mr. Rami, the former Director General of WTO, that guy is very angry for the US saying and doing, and he publicly claiming that when I and these guys, we had an interview, and these guys claim that maybe we need to prepare two solutions, WTO reform solutions. One is including the US, and another one is without the USA. So I'm afraid that the next step, definitely WTO will have very tough mission. Of course, we are supporting WTO have new rules and regulations, especially regarding e-commerce. And here you may find that not only in China but also in other developed countries, e-commerce becomes more and more popular. Also, I'm very happy to hear New Zealand, Chile, those countries, they are willing to promote new rules and regulations discussion. I hope that US WTO reform also can make those contents included. Last part, very briefly introduce Asia-Pacific region. In the near future, what will be the trend? I think that this region already becomes a new global trade and economic center. You may find that GDP of main countries in this region actually, that higher and higher in global economic scale. Also, if you look at our level of intra-regional trade, is rising year by year. That means we are relying each other, by global supply chain. In this regard, that means in the future, you cannot change this type of trend. That means we have to work together instead of, fighting each other. Also, if you look at the degree of integration of trade and investment, is constantly improving and obvious. For example, FDI and outward FDI in this region, and if you look, especially if you look at Asia-Pacific Regional Cooperation and the Integration Index, and you may find that our East Asia countries, Southeast countries, Asia-Pacific region, and actually becomes more and more integrated. Of course, I think that this type of trend means that in the near future, we are not only to strengthen existing cooperation. Also, we need to explore new approaches, such as more integrated mechanism. In the long run, we need to have our free trade area in Asia-Pacific region. Of course, regarding global supply chain cooperation, also, even if we are facing with difficulties and barriers and new uncertainties, however, we have to follow the trend and we have to respect economic rules and regulations. That I have to repeat the APEC Beijing agenda in 2014. At that time, I was very honored to be, Chinese expert working in this field. Especially, that in Beijing we have our, APEC, members. They already, have our very ambitious goal. That is realization of the FTAP in the long run. Also, in the recent years, actually, Chinese leaders and APEC meetings actually repeatedly, emphasizing on in the future, we have to aim for, FTAP. Every round, meanwhile, that every round of economic crisis or financial crisis has propelled Asia-Pacific regional integration process. So very briefly, if you look at the Asian financial crisis happened in 1997 to 1998. After that, China started to negotiate free trade agreements with ASEAN 10 economy. And then, Japan, ROK, New Zealand, and Australia, as well as India, gradually, signed 10+1 free trade agreements. That's why today, ASEAN very proud of to say that, we need to combine all of those 10+1 to formulate, RCEP. Meanwhile, if you look at 2008, another critical point, global financial crisis. After that, you may find that TPP, RCEP started, to be accelerate their negotiation process. Meanwhile, China ROK, Bilateral Free Trade Agreement, CJK, Trilateral Free Trade Agreement, started to negotiate. So actually, nowadays, I think that, facing with China-US, trade friction or trade war, that means, so extreme, tariff policy from the US side, it would be very possible to cause, I like to say, that may be belonging to artificial economic earthquake in global market, right? If you look at IMF prediction, they say that, maybe we are facing with a possible economic recession, and another new norms that is, so-called Trump recession, and that would be terrible, economic, recession or slowdown. So facing with this type of, situation, of course, we hope that all of those APEC members can, work together on global supply chain, regional cooperation in order to prevent the possible, recession. On the other hand, I hope that between China and the US, we may you have our bilateral negotiation instead of, fighting each other, and then we can promote, our common, development interests. 1 minute, just, emphasizing on, CJK, FTA, and RCEP. Those, you know that those two type of negotiations already last for many rounds, many years. But this year, for China's governmental mission, CJK, FTA, and RCEP belonging to priorities. So in this regard, we hope that those 16 countries, even if we are facing with a lot of barriers, difficulties, however, that more than 2/3 negotiations for market access has been finished. Also, more than 80% of tax has been finished. Our expectation is that by the end of this year, and we may make consensus. So that means we have another new tools to prevent, economic slowdown. So last sentence, I like to say that stable and prosperous Asia-Pacific trade is conducive to world development. So this region will definitely be the biggest and major driving forces for global development in the future. But that's relying on all of countries, including the US and China, to play, constructive role instead of disruptive role. Thank you.
Thank you. We've got 20 minutes, so we have time to really engage with Dr. Jian. Look, can I just perhaps cut to the chase? And you would be presented with these questions in China and Beijing a lot on CGTN. So more talks are scheduled next month between China and the US to try and break this trade pass. What's your forecast? Will there ultimately be success? And you have said China is confident to fight the United States if this stretches on.
Yeah. This is a very difficult issue. Right now, actually, if you look at public, sense, as well as those sense from scholar circle, different viewpoints on that. Some of people, may be more pessimistic. Some of people may be more optimistic a little bit. Personally, I'm keeping careful, optimistic attitude on that. Yesterday evening, I also discussed this issue with Rob. Just because that rationally, actually, China and the US, we have very special and different, big countries, game in the world. If you look at U.S.-Soviet Union relationship in the past, actually that's definitely independent relationship and different economic system and fighting each other extremely. The result was that Soviet Union disrupted, and if you look at U.S. Japan fighting each other back to 40 years. At that time, because Japan has a military union relationship with the USA. Also, US provided so huge pressure on Japan. So every time Japan make some of adjustments. Policies in the sector of textile, garments, electronic products, car products, something like that. Finally, Plaza Protocol actually provided a final solution. But for China, you may find that today China and the US belong into parallel biggest two economy in the world. Meanwhile, global supply chain, global value chain make China and the US connect each other. That means today China's economy and the US economy already melting each other. So that's why a scholar in the UK provided so-called chimeric concept. So that means for Chinese side, we think that we can, fight with the U.S. side if you are willing to fight. That's because, of course, my products are relying on the U.S. market. However, the U.S. side also relying on China's market. So that's why in recent years, actually, even if Trump administration, threatened the Chinese side, I will, levy tariffs on your products. You shouldn't retaliate U.S. side. And from Chinese side, every time we say that, no way, we have to fight. So that's why you can see the situation today. So in the medium and the long run, I think that rationally to consider, both U.S. national interests and China's national interests. From Chinese side, every time we suggest we have to be back, on the table. We have to negotiate. We have to create, agreement. Both two sides can accept, this type of, fair agreement. So I think that recently you can find that it seems that direction is going forward. That means I don't think that in short term, maybe the trade agreement can provide all of those solutions for problems between China and the U.S. But at least we need to be back under WTO, framework. Thus, I think that this region and the global economy would be more stable and sustainable. Thank you.
So a question we have via Slido, essentially building on China's impressive economic liberalisation, how do you respond to criticisms from the United States around IP, data localization, and technology transfer?
Yeah. Regarding IPR, blaming from developed world, but also I like to ask you that for IP, do you know that every year China need to pay, IP cost, IP payments to, US, EU, Japan, and other countries, how much for every year? About close to $30 billion US, IPR payment. So how can you explain, this type of, payments? This is one kind of fact. And the second one, I like to ask you that without, effective IPR, can you imagine that in China, we can have our, Huawei, this type of high-tech, corporation. We can have our, Tencent, Alibaba, as well as, China's, so out of China's high-tech, corporations today in the world, they have their competitiveness. So, of course, I have to confess that in China, for IPR, we just have 40 years market economy. For rules and regulation, there is a big space to be improved. However, that will take time. This is one thing. Regarding, enforced technology issues, maybe there are some of, detailed cases, but that's not on behalf of, all of cases happened in China. So if you look at the report provided from, US Business Council in China, EU Business Council in China, they just complain on that, but they lack of enough, evidence and, detailed story. So in this regard, of course, in order to avoid, worrying from, foreign investors, this year, first time in our new, foreign investment laws, we already have our new regulations. Also, MOFCOM will have more detailed, implementation regulation. Local governments will have their local regulations. And then I think that new system will provide guarantee, for there will be no enforced technology transfer in China. Thank you.
Just a question from Stephen Jacoby up the back there, the International Business Forum. Yeah. Yes, yeah.
Thank you very much, Professor Zhang, for an excellent presentation. My question is about China's Belt and Road Initiative. And the question is, do you think that the Belt and Road Initiative can contribute to the multilateral trading system, and can it be implemented in accordance with the WTO?
Yes, this is a good question. Belt and Road Initiative is a new initiative provided from Chinese side. You know, long ago in the history, you know, Silk Road actually promoted by mutual trade between China and other, you know, countries. Today, actually, in my mind, Belt and Road Initiative is a new type of, you know, development platform, cooperation platform. We hope that on this new platform, all of countries can work together, promote, you know, policy dialogue and infrastructure connectivities, and finally, we can promote mutual trade, mutual investment, and then we can, you know, go to forward, and we can have, you know, new development, especially for those developing countries. That's very critical. For example, I like to give you a case that is for, you know, free trade agreements, this type of, you know, cooperation mechanism for many developing countries, especially those, you know, Muslim countries. You know that today, WTO just have 160 members. The rest of 40s mainly, you know, allocated in developing country, especially Muslim world. And even they cannot accept WTO rules and regulations. How can you imagine they can accept a higher, you know, level for trade, investment, liberalization, and facilitation? But without free trade agreement, does that mean there will be no approach to promote international cooperation? No. Actually, I think that the Belt and Road Initiative provided a more comprehensive, you know, international cooperation concept. That means we can, you know, field by field, project by project, year by year, gradually we can promote our cooperation and development. Especially, in my mind, actually, trade and investment also relying on, you know, global supply chain, relying on WTO rules and regulations. Of course, if some of partners are willing to have free trade agreements, that would be better. We can combine both institutional cooperation and non-institutional cooperation. That would be more broad cooperation than, you know, free trade agreement itself. So I think that's belonging to our, you know, Eastern countries' wisdom. Of course, I noticed that some of, you know, Western think tanks, you know, just regarded, oh, this is China's new strategy. I think that's wrong. You know that if you are talking about BRI as a China's strategy, that's China's own thing. But we say that this is not China's strategy. This is China's initiative. Initiative means that that's just China's recommendation or suggestion. On the basis of bilateral willings, we hope we can cooperate with every possible partners. So that's why, you know, in recent years, more and more countries are willing to be involved in. So the last sentence is that this year we have our second Belt and Road Forum in Beijing. More than 125 countries signed cooperation memorandum with Chinese side. Also, another 50 international organizations, you know, signed, you know, memorandum with Chinese side. So I think that this is a new type of, you know, platform for international cooperation and development. Also, United Nations regarded, you know, BRI as a new platform to promote, you know, sustainable development goal achievement in 2030. So I hope that all our partners can work on that platform. Thank you.
Just looking forward, I mean, New Zealand, obviously Malaysia next year will host APEC, and then it'll be New Zealand's turn. What do you see as New Zealand's role in this environment we're in with the United States and China? What can we do to advance the system, I guess?
Oh, very good question. Actually, you know that APEC already formulated a big family, but different economies have different role. I think that I very appreciate the role played by New Zealand, you know, on APEC in this region. You know that every time when I introduce, you know, Asia-Pacific Economic Region, I often ask those attendants, do you know which country provided, you know, initiative of TPP? You know, a lot of people just say that the USA. I told them, actually, USA is not so smart. and then some of people answered me, maybe Japan? Oh, I told him Japan was a latecomer. So I just told them P4, including New Zealand. Actually, P4, you know, provided this initiative, very strategic idea, also, you know, promoted, you know, CPTPP formulation. That's very big contribution. Meanwhile, you know, from Chinese side, we appreciate New Zealand as a first developed country to sign, you know, to promote diplomatic relationship with Chinese side and join AIIB, signed free trade agreement with Chinese side, recognize China's, you know, full market status. So all of those, you know, roles played by New Zealand appreciated seriously, sincerely appreciated by Chinese side. So that's why in recent years, bilateral diplomatic relationship and trade economic relationship becomes better and better. So in the near future, I think that aiming for our free trade area in Asia-Pacific region, we still need to promote more and more bilateral, trilateral, and multilateral free trade agreements. Meanwhile, we need to make all of those working groups under APEC playing role continually. In this regard, I think that New Zealand and other small economies, actually, they are confirmedly to support multilateral cooperation mechanism, supporting WTO, you know, regime. So in this regard, I hope that China also can work with New Zealand in the near future to play, you know, constructive and positive role in the region.
One of the questions that's come up from the floor, and it probably also plays into the fact that we've had a Pacific reset in terms of our own policies, but does China's increased investment in the Pacific, and in particular financing Pacific nations' infrastructure through loans, does that undermine the multilateral system?
Yes. In my mind, back to 2014, that year, you know, APEC meeting happened in Beijing. I noticed that New York Times and Washington, you know, Herald reported that, oh, look, Chinese side provided actually $30 million to promote, you know, infrastructure connectivity in Asia-Pacific region. And what about the USA? USA didn't provide, you know, any cents for that. So it was very impressed me. Meanwhile, you know, under Belt and Road Initiative, actually from Chinese side, we already have so a lot of infrastructure connectivity projects, you know, with APEC countries. For example, you know, a port located in north part of Australia actually already, you know, constructed and invested by Chinese side. Also, if you look at ASEAN countries, other countries has a very ambitious master plan to improve their, you know, infrastructure connectivity. Meanwhile, ASEAN 10 economy also are willing to promote connectivity with Chinese side, including railway, highway, and road, you know, ports connectivity, something like that. So, of course, from Chinese side, we have our obvious advantages in the field of infrastructure. Meanwhile, we hope to promote our trade and investment relationship by, dialogue, policy dialogue, and infrastructure, connectivity. So I think that in the near future, China's role will make APEC cooperation, more comprehensive. Also, in that process, all of economies may, benefit from that cooperation.
Just time for one very quick final question, and all right, very quick question. I've only got a minute to answer.
Hello. Okay, thank you for your talk. My very quick question is, the recent figures of Chinese economic growth are showing a slight decrease in the growth. How much of that can be attributable to the trade war?
Yeah. Actually, last year, China's market deeply worrying about, trade war, very negative impact. However, finally, if you look at China's trade data and the economic growth rate in 2018, we felt that we can, standing continually. Also, China's economy can tolerate this type of, trade friction. So this year, you can find that China's market becomes more confident. Because even if growth rate slow down a little bit, but better than India's economic growth rate. In my mind, at the beginning of this year, IMF prediction that is India growth rate will be 7.5% and China, 6.2%. But recently, IMF, make adjustments. They said that China growth rate will be 6.3. And in fact, India's growth rate recently already below, 6%. So I mean, in this year, from my viewpoint, point, I think that China's macroeconomic policy, especially monetary policy and fiscal policy, can play a role because we have enough space to make, adjustments. Meanwhile, China's economy is more relying on domestic markets instead of, international trade. So that means this year, China's economic could be maintained, stable. That's my viewpoints. Thank you.
Thank you, and thank you very much for such a frank and interesting address, and concise and to the point, which is always a joy for any moderator. Please thank our speaker.
Thank you all.